Thank you, Jessica. It's great to be here. As this is a sermon of the future, I thought I should start with an image of an angel. More on her later. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to give a meditation on the future and time, and I'm also going to explore various different methods and approaches for doing the future. I'm going to look at a number of things from design fiction to a number of different approaches, and I'm going to explore how spaces like this can be places where we can experience and experiment in the future. But I first have to confess that I personally have a slightly troubled relationship to the future. I've spent most of my professional life working towards a bottom-up people's renaissance, but our future was stolen. What we got instead was Lehman Brothers and the NSA. But actually, we get both of these futures at the same time. The future is Janus-faced. And what that tells us is that we really need to rethink what the future is and how we understand the future. The future itself is a cultural artifact. A lot of our images on the future were actually formed in the Cold War. They were part of the battle for minds and ideas of the Cold War. And some of the big ideas through which we make sense of the future, we now question. Progress, for example, is questioned. We understand that capitalism needs to open up new spaces of meaning for it to serve its endless need for new markets, and that futures are very much a part of that. The apocalypse, we could say that the climate apocalypse has already arrived, and what do we get? Adaptation, managerialism, more of the same. And then those two twin classic ways of understanding the future or facing the future, utopia and dystopia. And what fascinates me is that quite often we get those at exactly the same time. So the future's not what it used to be. Progress led nowhere. The avant-garde is over. After the apocalypse came adaptation, and utopia and dystopia are different experiences of the same thing. So we need new ways to think about, imagine, and create the future. For me, one of the most powerful images about history comes from Walter Benjamin. And he posed the idea, or the image, of the angel of history, gazing over its shoulder, aghast at the wreckage of the past, piling up behind it. And the metaphor was supposed to convey that we're frozen into inaction by the wreckage of the past. Well, you could say that today we're frozen into inaction by the wreckage of the future piling up in front of us. We look aghast at predictions of climate change. And what do? We're frozen to inaction. So who might be the angels of futurity? This is Chelsea Manning, formerly known as Bradley Manning. I would say she and people like Edward Snowden, they're the true agents of the future today. To understand the future, we have to understand how our sense of time has changed. It was with the emergence of clocks in public squares that we first developed a shared sense of time. It was the development of railways and railway timetables that we had standardization of time. And this really underpinned the emergence of the modern age. Now time has changed again. All of recorded history is available to us instantaneously. We see a collapse of past and future into the present. Nothing is truly new anymore. So what does the future look like? It might look something like this. Perhaps it looks something like this. This is an image of how communities and projects emerge in the GitHub open source sharing environment. And what we see there is that the future emerges not in a linear way, but through a series of backfixes and many iterations. So where does that leave us? To me, the fundamental shift in how we orient ourselves towards the future is a strategic one. For me, what I'm interested in is less predictions of the future, but the sense that the future is all around us, and the future is what we make. These two quotes, perhaps more than anything, have influenced my thinking of the future. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. The future is already here. It's not evenly distributed. So what are these statements? How do we interpret them? Well, we could interpret them as design principles for critical future making. And there's many others. I particularly like this from Jaime Cascio, who's looked at how we've changed our view of history. We used to view history in terms of the deeds of great men. Now we understand we have to look at the history of everybody. And he asks, what might a people's history of the future look like? Another idea comes from Scott Smith, the idea we have to contest what he calls flat pack futures, the kind of futures you might find in the marketing brochure of a corporation. There's other ideas as well, the idea of participatory futures, of questioning, imagining, making futures together, and the idea that the future might be a cultural practice. So, what about methods? This brings me on to festivals. I run a festival, and in that festival, it's conceived as a laboratory for testing, experimenting, imagining futures. But why festivals? Festivals are spaces we come together to experience new things. Festivals bring together communities of artists, passionate amateurs. They're places where the exceptional is every day. They're safe places to experiment and safe places to fail. So we use the festival as a space to experiment, and we develop methodologies. We've got a Festivals Lab toolkit. We publish these. We collaborate with universities. We learn from them. We share our insights. And there's a number of methods that we draw on. We draw on a number of different approaches to prototyping, whether that's from critical design, tactical urbanism. There's a lot of different disciplines that use rapid prototyping, artworks, media sketches to read and design the future. Now, some of the approaches there are fairly conventional. It's about developing scenarios. And it's about using ethnography to see how people inhabit those. But there's also distinctive aspects of it. There's distinctive methods we're bringing in, such as a Wizard of Oz approach from computing, which is a way to prototype fictional future technologies. We also draw on design fictions. We heard from Anab Jain, who's perhaps, well, certainly if not the leading practitioner in that space. And in design fiction, the future becomes a tool to critically interrogate the present. Very powerful. Also, the idea of living labs, the idea of taking research out of laboratories and doing it in the wild. Well, why not in the space of a festival? Again, an inspirational quote to me, the idea that somewhere something incredible is waiting to be known. So festivals are in constructed spaces where we can create experiments and see how they unfold. They're spaces where serendipity can emerge and the unexpected can emerge. And then also we see how, as an aspiration, we see how art practice has changed. Increasingly, artists don't just make artworks, they build tools that they use and that other people use, open source tools on which they collaborate. Well, for people interested in the future, isn't that what we should be doing too? Building tools, open source tools for other people to create and invent with. So festivals, okay, so they're very interesting methods, but why a festival? Why do that in a festival? As I say, festivals bring together interesting people. They bring together communities who want to create and experiment and explore. But why a festival? Well, to answer that question, we can go back in time, back in history. The Russian critic Bakhtin looked at medieval carnivals, for example, the Feast of Fools. And in these carnivals, what would happen is that social norms would be turned on their head for a day. So a king would be a pauper would be a king. But Bakhtin argued that these were actually powerfully creative events when alternate worlds were made real. Well, what if we could turn that into a design method? So the carnivalesque, it's a temporary space and moment using humor and chaos to subvert social norms and liberate new ideas. But still, festivals, today at least, they're about lost weekends. They're about having fun. Well, Heidegger argued that something similar was actually fundamental to who we are as human beings, as standing out of the surface of life's contingencies to allow contemplation of being. Well, maybe festivity is something similar, something where we can come together to have a shared experience of what it is to be human, but also to explore possible futures. So, to give you some examples of the kind of projects we've done, so the one we're working on right now is a pop-up future city in Manchester. But just to run through some past ones, we've recently been collaborating with the BBC on a very ambitious project, which can only be described as a possible future. We're certainly not there yet. The idea of the digital public space is a vision that all of recorded human heritage and culture can be made freely available for everyone to access, explore, remix, and create with. So I'm thinking about the archives of broadcasters, of museums, everything that's been captured, produced by human that can be captured and made available online. So the space was a prototype for a digital public space. And we worked on that project, and we worked with the artist group Blast Theory in a festival where we experimented with prototype interfaces, user interfaces to a digital public space. We had performers in the streets of Manchester and online. We were streaming live, and we were experimenting in how a digital public space can be made real through artwork involving artists and participants. Now, that's the kind of project that fits in a festival. Other things we've done might not. We've also done a lot of work around open data. So we've used the space of a festival to bring a community together to lead to change in policy. It led to the formation of the Greater Manchester Data Store and an open data community. So the festival is a space where we come together, we experiment, we look at prototypes, but then coming out of that can be new policy, new infrastructure. And then a recent project we did was about surveillance. And in this project, we recorded the private conversations of people in the conference, people like you, and we transcribed them and we published them indelibly online. And this was a prototype looking at a near-future scenario. Again, this one's certainly a dystopia. The idea that, I mean, we're familiar with Google Street View and how that captures incidental happenings on the street and makes them, publishes them. And now we've got Google Glass coming downstream. So how far is it away from our private conversations being captured and published indelibly online? And we thought one way to experiment, to question that possible future, is to prototype it. So we had an artwork, and our audience, our festival audience, who've been coming for 18 years now and trust us to be lab rats in our experiments, signed up to this experiment and had their private conversations transcribed forever online. And the interaction around that was like the kind of interaction you get when you sign up for an online service. So people signing up to this experiment got access to an exclusive lounge. That's exactly how online services work. If you want to access this service, you have to give away your private data. And then with those participants, we explored that potential future, that possible future. And one quote from a participant was, "This is like kissing while being watched." Now, Walter Benjamin argued that if we want to wrest the future from the present, we have to blast apart empty, homogeneous time. The last artwork I'll show you is a transparency grenade by Julian Oliver that sought to do just that. This is an artwork, but also a real functioning device. And this is a device intended to increase transparency in corporate boardrooms. This is a device you can take into a boardroom, a meeting in your suitcase, and if you hear something that you feel the public should know about, you can pull the pin and it instantly publishes the contents of every screen of every laptop on the local network. So that's an example of blasting past homogeneous, empty time. But I want to leave the last word for our angel of futurity. So Chelsea Manning and others like her have really led by example. And they show us that the future is what we make. But they also teach us that the future is Janus-faced. Thank you very much.